The alarm bell rang across the Galactic Defense Academy at exactly 6 in the morning. Hundreds of cadets from dozens of different worlds rushed out of their sleeping quarters and into the wide hallways. They moved quickly, their feet making different sounds on the metal floor. Some had boots, some had claws, and some had nothing at all. But when Cadet 13 stepped into the main corridor, everything changed. The noise stopped. The running stopped. Even the cadets who were floating in. The air with their natural abilities came to a halt. Everyone turned to look at the massive figure that had just emerged from room 347. Cadet 13 was a Zephyrian, and he looked like death itself had learned to walk. He stood nearly 8 feet tall, his body covered in dark gray armor that grew naturally from his skin. His arms were thick as tree trunks, ending in hands that bore claws longer than most beings' fingers. His face was angular and sharp, with yellow eyes that seemed to glow in the dim hallway light. When he breathed, small puffs of steam came from his nostrils. The other cadets pressed themselves against the walls as he walked past. A small blue-skinned Altarian cadet actually fainted and had to be caught by his roommate. 2 Centaurian cadets, who were known for their bravery, quickly ducked into a side passage to avoid being in his path. Cadet 13 did not seem to notice the fear he caused. He walked with slow, measured steps toward the dining hall, his claws clicking on the metal floor with each step. Behind him, the other cadets waited a full minute before they dared to move again. In the dining hall, the morning rush turned into organized chaos. Word spread quickly through the room that Cadet 13 was coming. Tables that had been full suddenly became empty as cadets grabbed their food and moved to the far side of the large room. The serving staff, mostly peaceful Valerian beings, trembled as they prepared his meal. When Cadet 13 entered the dining hall, the room fell silent except for the sound of his footsteps. He walked to the serving counter, where a nervous Valerian server handed him a tray loaded with enough food to feed 3 normal cadets. The server's hands shook so badly that some of the food spilled onto the floor. Cadet 13 looked down at the yawn, spilled food, then at the server. His yellow eyes narrowed slightly. The server made a small whimpering sound and backed away so quickly that he knocked over a stack of plates. The crash echoed through the silent room like thunder. "Clean it up," Cadet 13 said in a voice that sounded like grinding stone. The server nodded so hard his head looked like it might fall off, then rushed to get cleaning supplies. Cadet 13 took his tray and walked to a table in the center of the room. The table had been full just moments before, but now it was completely empty. He sat down heavily, the chair groaning under his weight, and began to eat. His teeth were sharp and pointed, designed for tearing meat, and he made no effort to eat quietly. Around him, hundreds of cadets sat pressed against the walls, eating their breakfast in whispered conversations. No one dared to look directly at him for more than a second. The few who did quickly looked away when his yellow eyes swept across the room. At the instructor's table, Commander Rodriguez leaned over to speak quietly with Professor Vex, a thin, purple-skinned being who taught psychology. "This cannot continue," Rodriguez whispered. "The other cadets are too afraid to function normally. Yesterday, I had to cancel combat training because half the class refused to enter the same room as him." Professor Vex nodded slowly, her large black eyes fixed on Cadet 13. "His species are natural predators," she said quietly, "on his home. World Zephyrians are the top hunters. Every other species they encounter is either prey or competition to be eliminated. He cannot help what he is, but he can help how he acts," Rodriguez replied. "Yesterday, he sent 3 cadets to the medical bay during a simple sparring exercise. He was not even trying to hurt them. He was holding back, and he still nearly killed them." Professor Vex watched as Cadet 13 finished his meal and stood up. Once again, the room fell silent. He walked to the disposal unit, dropped off his tray, and headed for the exit. As soon as he was gone, the noise in the room returned like a dam had burst. What makes it worse, Rodriguez continued, is that he is incredibly skilled. His test scores are among the highest in the academy. His tactical knowledge is excellent. His physical abilities are beyond anything we have seen. But none of that matters if every other cadet is too terrified to be in the same room with him. The morning continued like this. In every class, Cadet 13 would enter, and the room would fall silent. Other cadets would move as far away from him as possible. Instructors would struggle to maintain normal class discussions because no one wanted to speak up and draw his attention. During tactical studies, Professor Kim tried to organize group discussions about fleet movements. She divided the class into teams, but every team that was assigned to work with Cadet 13 would find excuses to leave. By the end of the class, he sat alone at a table with 5 empty chairs around him. In engineering class, the same thing happened. Cadet 13 would approach a workstation, and the cadets already there would suddenly remember they had urgent business elsewhere. Tools would be left behind, projects abandoned, all to avoid being near him. The worst incident happened during physical training. The gymnasium was large enough to hold 300 cadets, but when Cadet 13 entered, it felt crowded. Instructor Davis, a former military officer from Earth, tried to organize combat practice sessions. "Everyone pair up," Davis called out. "We will practice basic defensive moves." 300 cadets quickly formed 150 pairs. Cadet 13 stood alone in the center of the gym, looking around at the other cadets. No one met his eyes. "Cadet 13, Davis said, trying to sound confident. "You can work with Cadet Morton." Cadet Morton, a large reptilian being from the Dracos system, went pale. "Sir, I have an injury from yesterday. Perhaps I should sit out today." "Then pair with Cadet Voss," Davis said, pointing to another cadet. Cadet Voss immediately began limping, claiming an old leg injury had suddenly returned. One by one, every cadet in the gym developed a sudden illness, injury, or urgent appointment elsewhere. Within 10 minutes, the gymnasium was empty except for Cadet 13 and Instructor Davis. Davis looked around the empty gym, then at Cadet 13. "Well," he said with a tired sigh, "I suppose we will have to work on solo exercises today." Cadet 13 nodded once and began his training routine. He moved through combat forms with deadly precision, his claws cutting through the air with whistling sounds. His movements were fluid and powerful, like a predator preparing to strike. Even watching him practice was frightening. As the day ended, Admiral Corvin sat in his office reviewing reports from instructors throughout the academy. Every report mentioned the same problem. Classes were disrupted. Training was impossible. Other cadets were requesting transfers to different academies, claiming they feared for their lives. Admiral Corvin looked out his window at the academy grounds. In the distance, he could see Cadet 13 walking alone across the courtyard. Other cadets gave him a wide path, some crossing to the other side of the courtyard entirely to avoid him. The Admiral picked up his communication device and pressed a button. "Get me the Zephyrian embassy," he said. "We need to discuss Cadet 13. Something had to be done." The academy could not function with one cadet terrorizing all the others. But what could they do with someone who was not trying to be frightening? He was simply being himself, and himself was the most dangerous thing most of these cadets had ever seen. As night fell over the academy, Cadet 13 sat alone in his room, sharpening his claws with a special stone from his home world. He did not understand why the other cadets avoided him. He was here to learn, just like they were. But every day, he found himself more isolated, more alone. Tomorrow would be another day of empty chairs and frightened faces. Another day of being the terror. of the Academy, whether he wanted to be or not. The transport ship from Earth arrived on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after Admiral Corvin's meeting with the Zephyrian embassy had ended with no solution. The ship was small and looked very plain compared to the sleek vessels from other worlds. It landed at the Academy's main docking bay with a soft thud and a small puff of steam from its engines. A crowd of cadets had gathered to watch the arrival. News had spread quickly through the Academy that a new species was joining them. The humans were supposed to be from a recently discovered world called Earth, and no one knew what to expect. "I heard they have no natural weapons," whispered a Altarian cadet to his friend. "My instructor said they have no armor plating either," replied a Centaurian cadet. "How did they even survive long enough to develop space travel?" The crowd grew larger as more cadets arrived to see the newcomers. Even some instructors came to watch. Everyone was curious about this new species that had somehow earned a place at the most prestigious military academy in the galaxy. The ships. Door opened with a hiss, and a ramp extended to the ground. The crowd fell silent, waiting to see what would emerge. The first human to appear was a small female with reddish-brown hair that fell to her shoulders. She wore a simple green uniform that looked nothing like the advanced materials used by other species. Her skin was pale pink, and she had bright green eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. She was tiny. Standing barely 5.5 feet tall, she looked like a child compared to most of the other cadets. Her arms were thin, with no visible muscle definition. Her hands had no claws, just small, blunt fingernails. Her teeth, when she smiled at the crowd, were flat and white. "That's it?" asked a Dracos cadet. "That's what we've been waiting for?" The human female walked down the ramp, carrying a small bag over her shoulder. In her other hand, she carried something that made the crowd stir with interest. It was a small container with metal bars on one side and a handle on top. "What is that thing?" someone whispered. As the human reached the bottom of the ramp, she set down the container and opened a small door on the front. The crowd leaned forward to see what was inside. A small orange creature stepped out of the container. It was covered in fur and had 4 legs, a long tail, and pointed ears. It sat down next to the human's feet and began licking one of its paws with a small pink tongue. The crowd was confused. No one had ever seen anything like this creature before. It was smaller than most of the cadets' heads, and it didn't look dangerous at all. In fact, it looked almost silly as it continued to clean itself. "Welcome to the Galactic Defense Academy," said Commander Rodriguez, stepping forward from the crowd. "I am Commander Rodriguez. You must be Lisa Carter." The human smiled and nodded. "Yes, sir. Thank you for accepting me into your program. I'm very excited to be here." Her voice was soft and pleasant, nothing like the harsh tones of warrior species or the musical sounds of the more advanced civilizations. She sounded almost musical, but in a simple way. "And this is?" Commander Rodriguez looked down at the small orange creature. "This is Whiskers," Lisa said, reaching down to pet the creature. "He's my cat. I hope it's okay that I brought him. The paperwork said cadets could bring personal items, and he's very important to me." The crowd murmured among themselves. A cat? What kind of creature was a cat? And why would someone bring such a small, helpless-looking animal to a military academy? Commander Rodriguez had read the reports about humans and their unusual habit of keeping other species as companions, but seeing it in person was strange. "Of course," he said. "We have prepared quarters for you in the main dormitory. Cadet Stevens will show you the way." A nervous-looking cadet stepped forward. He was from Proxima, a peaceful world, and he looked almost as small as the human did. "Follow me, please," he said. Lisa picked up Whiskers and placed him back in the container, which she now carried like a small suitcase. The crowd parted as she followed Cadet Stevens toward the dormitory building's dot. As they walked, whispers followed them. The other cadets had never seen anything like this before. Most species that joined the academy were either natural warriors or highly advanced technologically. The humans appeared to be neither. "She looks so fragile," whispered a Valerian cadet. "How did they even survive long enough to develop space travel?" asked another. "And what is that orange thing? It looks completely useless." Lisa seemed to ignore the whispers, but she noticed them. She smiled and nodded to cadets who made eye contact, but most looked away quickly. She had expected this reaction. The briefing materials had warned her that humans were very different from most spacefaring species in the dormitory. Cadet Stevens showed her to room 231, just down the hall from the common area. "The dining hall is on the ground floor," he explained. "Classes start at 0800 hours. The schedule is posted on your door." "Thank you," Lisa said. "You've been very kind." Cadet Stevens looked surprised. Kindness was not something often mentioned at the academy. "You're welcome," he said, then hurried away. Lisa opened her door and stepped into her new room. It was small but clean, with a bed, a desk, and a small window that looked out over the academy grounds. She set down Whisker's container and opened it again. The cat stepped out and immediately began exploring the room. He sniffed at the corners, investigated the bed, and rubbed against Lisa's legs. His purring filled the small room with a soft, rumbling sound. "Well, Whiskers," Lisa said, unpacking her few belongings, "this is our new home. I hope you like it." Meanwhile, in the academy's main building, the instructors were gathering for an emergency meeting. Admiral Coven had called them together to discuss the new human cadet. "What do we know about this species?" asked Professor Vex. Commander Rodriguez consulted his notes. "They call themselves humans. They come from a world called Earth in a system they call Sol. They have no natural weapons, no armor, no enhanced physical abilities. They appear to be omnivores, eating both plants and meat." "How did they survive?" asked Instructor Davis. "According to their files, they use tools extensively. They also have something called pack bonding, where they form emotional connections with other species. That small creature she brought is apparently not food or a weapon. It's a companion." The instructors looked at each other in confusion. The idea of keeping another species as a companion, not as food or labor, was completely foreign to most. "Of them, what are her test scores?" asked Professor Kim. Rodriguez smiled. "That's the interesting part. Her academic scores are excellent. Her tactical thinking is outstanding. She scored in the top 10% on the entrance examinations." "But physically?" asked Instructor Davis. "Below average by our standards. But her psychological profile is remarkable. She shows no fear responses to scenarios that would terrify most species. She also demonstrates unusual problem-solving abilities." Admiral Corvin nodded slowly. "The human government was very insistent that we accept their cadet. They implied that humans might be more capable than they appear." "Sir," said Professor Vex, "I would like to observe her interactions with the other cadets. This pack bonding behavior could be very interesting to study." The next morning, Lisa made her way to the dining hall with Whiskers in his carrier. She had decided to keep him with her during meals, at least until she learned more about the Academy's rules and customs. The dining hall was buzzing with its usual morning activity when she entered. Cadets from dozens of worlds sat at tables, eating breakfast and talking in various languages. But as Lisa walked through the room, conversation stopped and heads turned. She found an empty table near the middle of the room and sat down. She placed Whisker's carrier on the table next to her and opened the small door so he could see out. The cat sat calmly in the carrier, watching the room with yellow eyes. The effect was immediate. Cadets at nearby tables began staring at the small orange creature. Some pointed and whispered to their friends. Others looked confused or curious. Lisa went to the serving counter and got her breakfast. The Valerian server was much friendlier to her than he had been to other cadets. She thanked him politely and returned to her table. As she ate, more cadets approached to get a better look at Whiskers. The cat seemed to enjoy the attention, sitting calmly and occasionally meowing softly. Some cadets laughed at the sound, having never heard anything like it before. "What does it do?" asked a Centaurian cadet. "He's a companion," Lisa explained. "He provides emotional support and friendship. On Earth, many humans have animal companions. But what is his function?" The cadet persisted. "Is he a weapon? A tool?" Lisa smiled. "His function is to be my friend. He makes me happy, and I take care of him. We help each other." The concept was so foreign that several cadets stood around her table, trying to understand. A small creature that existed only to be a friend? The idea was fascinating and confusing at the same time. At the far end of the dining hall, near the entrance, Cadet 13 had just arrived for breakfast. He stood in the doorway, looking around the room as he always did. But something was different. Today, the usual silence that followed his arrival did not come. Instead, cadets were gathered around a table in the middle of the room, talking and laughing. They were so focused on whatever they were looking at that they had not noticed him. Enter. Cadet 13 walked toward the serving counter, his claws clicking on the floor. A few cadet. The change in Cadet 13's behavior started the very next day. It was during morning tactical studies, when everyone first noticed something was wrong. Professor Kim was discussing fleet formations when Cadet 13 entered the classroom. As usual, the room fell silent, and cadets shifted nervously in their seats. But this time, Cadet 13 did not take his usual seat in the front row. Instead, he stopped at the doorway and scanned the room carefully. His yellow eyes found Lisa Carter sitting in the middle section with Whiskers Carrier on the floor beside her chair. Without a word, Cadet 13 turned around and left the classroom. "Professor." Kim stared at the empty doorway in surprise. In 3 years of teaching at the academy, she had never seen Cadet 13 miss a class. He was always present, always on time, and always prepared. "Should I go after him?" asked Altarian Cadet. "No," Professor Kim said slowly. "Let's continue with the lesson." But she could not concentrate. Neither could the other cadets. Everyone kept glancing at the door, wondering what had happened to their most feared classmate. At lunch, the same thing happened. Cadet 13 entered the dining hall and began walking toward his usual table. But when he saw Lisa sitting with Whiskers, he stopped in the middle of the room. For a long moment, he stood perfectly still, staring at the small orange cat. Whiskers looked back at him with calm yellow eyes. The cat showed no fear, no aggressive behavior. He simply sat in his carrier and watched the massive Zephyrian warrior. Other cadets noticed the strange staring contest. Conversation stopped as everyone waited to see what would happen. Some cadets started moving away from the area, expecting violence. But after 30 seconds, Cadet 13 turned and walked out of the dining hall. He did not get food. He did not sit down. He simply left. The dining hall erupted in whispers. "Did you see that?" He ran away. The human's creature scared him. Lisa looked around in confusion. She had no idea what had just happened. She leaned down to pet Whiskers through the carrier bars. "What was that about, boy?" By the end of the week, the pattern was clear. Wherever Lisa and Whiskers went, Cadet 13 would appear, see them, and immediately leave. It happened in the library, the gymnasium, the computer labs, and even the outdoor training areas. The other cadets began to notice that their most feared classmate was avoiding entire sections of the academy. Combat training, which had been canceled for weeks because of Cadet 13's intimidating presence, resumed because he stopped showing up. "This is incredible," Commander Rodriguez said during a meeting with the other instructors. "For the first time in months, we had a normal combat class. Everyone participated. No one was afraid." "But where is Cadet 13? Asked Professor Kim. "He has missed half his classes this week. According to his roommate, he spends most of his time in his room or walking around the outer areas of the academy," replied Instructor Davis. "He seems to be avoiding anywhere the human might be." Professor Vex had been quietly observing the situation. "I would like to study this further," she said. "The behavior suggests a deep psychological response." "To what?" asked Rodriguez. "The human is completely harmless. She's friendly, polite, and helpful. Her academic work is excellent. Not the human," Professor Vex said thoughtfully. "The cat." The next day, Professor Vex decided to conduct an experiment. She arranged for Lisa to bring Whiskers to the psychology lab during a time when she knew Cadet 13 would be passing by. Lisa arrived at the lab carrying Whiskers in his carrier. She had been asked to participate in a study about human-animal bonding, which seemed reasonable to her. "Please, sit here," Professor Vex said, gesturing to a chair near the window. "I want to observe how your companion behaves in a new environment." Lisa set down the carrier and opened the door. Whiskers stepped out and began exploring the lab. He sniffed at equipment, investigated corners, and eventually jumped onto a table where he could see out the window. "He's very curious," Lisa explained. "Cats like to explore new places. They're natural hunters, so they want to understand their environment." "Hunters?" Professor Vex asked with interest. "Well, not really hunters anymore," Lisa said. "On Earth, cats used to hunt small animals for food. But now they live with humans, so we feed them. They still have the instincts, though. They like to stalk things and pounce on toys." As if to demonstrate, Whiskers noticed a small light reflection on the wall and immediately crouched down. His pupils dilated, his tail twitched, and he began to wiggle his hindquarters in preparation to pounce. At that exact moment, Cadet 13 appeared in the hallway outside the lab. Through the window, he could see the small orange creature in a hunting position. Every instinct in his body screamed danger. Professor Vex watched in fascination as Cadet 13 froze in the hallway. His hands clenched into fists. His breathing became rapid. Sweat began to form on his forehead, despite the cool temperature. Whiskers pounced on the light reflection, missed, and sat down to clean his paw as if nothing had happened. But the damage was done. Cadet 13 had seen a predator in action, even if it was just playing. He turned and walked quickly away from the lab. "Fascinating," Professor Vex murmured, making notes on her tablet. "Is something wrong?" Lisa asked, noticing the instructor's intense interest. "Not wrong, exactly, Professor," Vex said, "but very interesting. Tell me, how large were the animals that cats hunted on your world?" Lisa thought for a moment. "Small ones, mostly. Mice, birds, insects. Nothing bigger than a rabbit, usually." "And cats were successful hunters?" "Very successful. They're incredibly good at it. Silent, patient, precise. They can catch things much larger than themselves if they need to." Professor Vex nodded slowly. This was beginning to make sense. That afternoon, she called a meeting with the other instructors and Admiral Corvin. "I believe I understand what is happening with Cadet 13, she announced. "Please explain," said the Admiral. "On the Zephyrian home world, there are creatures called shadow stalkers. They are small, about the size of the human's cat, but they are the only predators capable of killing adult Zephyrians." The room fell silent. "How is that possible?" asked Commander Rodriguez. Zephyrians are apex predators. They have natural armor, claws, size advantage. Shadow stalkers hunt differently, Professor Vex explained. They are small, silent, and patient. They wait for the perfect moment, then strike with precision at vulnerable spots. A Zephyrian can fight off any large predator, but these small hunters are nearly impossible to defend against. And the cat reminds him of these creatures? Asked Instructor Davis. More than reminds him. To a Zephyrian, the cat exhibits all the behavioral patterns of a shadow stalker. The way it moves, the way it watches, the way it sits perfectly still, and then suddenly pounces. Every instinct tells Cadet 13 that this creature is dangerous. Admiral Corvin leaned back in his chair. So our most feared cadet is terrified of a small pet cat. It's not rational fear, Professor Vex said. It's deeper than that. It's evolutionary programming. On his world, creatures that look and act like that cat are deadly. His brain cannot distinguish between a harmless pet and a natural predator. Meanwhile, Lisa was having lunch with several other cadets who had finally worked up the courage to sit with her. She was explaining more about Earth and human customs when Cadet Stevens asked about Whiskers. "Why did you bring him here?" Stevens asked. "This is a military academy. What purpose does he serve?" Lisa smiled and reached down to pet Whiskers through the carrier bars. "He's my friend," she said simply. "Humans form emotional bonds with animals. We've been doing it for thousands of years. Cats, dogs, horses, birds. We keep them as companions." "But they provide no tactical advantage?" asked a Centaurian cadet. "Not in the way you mean," Lisa said. "But they provide emotional support. They reduce stress, provide companionship, and help us feel less alone. Studies show that humans with animal companions are healthier and happier." "And they hunt?" asked another cadet, remembering what Professor Vex had mentioned. "Well, Whiskers has never actually hunted anything real," Lisa said. "He's a house cat. He's never been outside except in his carrier. But he still has the instincts. He'll chase toy mice, stalk shadows, pounce on string. It's just play behavior now." As she spoke, Whiskers began batting at something in his carrier. The cadets watched in fascination as the small cat played with what appeared to be a small toy. Mouse. His movements were quick and precise, his focus complete. "He's very good at it," observed Stevens. "Oh, yes," Lisa said proudly. "Even as pets, cats are incredible hunters. They're perfectly designed for it. Silent movement, excellent night vision, lightning-fast reflexes. If he was wild, he could catch almost anything smaller than himself." Across the dining hall, Cadet 13 stood in the doorway. He had been about to enter when he heard Lisa talking about hunting. The word alone was enough to make him nervous, but when he saw the small orange creature playing with its toy, his fear doubled dot to his eyes. The cat was not playing. It was practicing. Every movement was a killing technique being refined. The way it held the toy, the way it bit it, the way it kicked with its back legs. These were all methods that shadow stalkers used to kill. He backed away from the dining hall and went to his room. He had not eaten a proper meal in days, but he could not bring himself to enter any room where the cat might be. That night, as Lisa got ready for bed, she let Whiskers out of his carrier to explore the room. The cat inv. The announcement came on a Monday morning during assembly. Admiral Corvin stood before the gathered cadets and announced that the annual combat assessment would begin the following week. "This year's assessment will be different," the Admiral explained. "Instead of individual testing, you will work in teams of 5. Each team will face a series of challenges designed to test your tactical thinking, combat abilities, and leadership skills." A murmur went through the assembled cadets. The combat assessment was the most important test of the year. It determined Class rankings influenced future assignments and was closely watched by military leaders throughout the galaxy. Team assignments will be posted tomorrow, Admiral Corvin continued. The assessment will take place over 3 days in the Corthan training facility. You will be required to bring all personal belongings and any companions, as you will be isolated from the academy during the entire test. Lisa felt a little worry as she heard this. She had been at the academy for 3 weeks now, and wow, she had made friends with some of the other cadets. She was still unsure about her combat abilities compared to the other species. After the assembly, cadets gathered in small groups to discuss the upcoming test. Lisa found herself sitting with Stevens and 2 other cadets she had befriended. "I wonder who we'll be paired with," Stevens said nervously. "I hope it's not anyone too intimidating." "At least we don't have to worry about Cadet 13, said Morton. "A Dracos cadet. He's been avoiding everyone lately. Maybe he won't even participate." Lisa had noticed the strange behavior of the large Zephyrian cadet, but she didn't understand why he always seemed to leave whenever she appeared. She assumed he simply didn't like new cadets, or perhaps didn't approve of humans being at the academy. The next morning, team assignments were posted on the main bulletin board. Cadets crowded around, searching for their names and hoping for good. Teammates. Lisa pushed through the crowd and found her name on Team 7. She read the other names listed with her. Stevens, Morton, Vex, an Altarian engineering student, and at the bottom of the list, Cadet 13. She felt a chill run down her spine. She had never actually spoken to Cadet 13, but his reputation was well known throughout the academy. The other cadets, who had been assigned to Team 7, looked equally worried. "This is not good," Stevens whispered. "He's going to dominate everything. We'll just be in his way. Maybe he'll take charge, and we can just follow orders," Morton suggested hopefully, but Lisa was thinking about something else. She had noticed that Cadet 13 seemed to avoid her specifically. During the assessment, they would be stuck together for 3 days. There would be no way for him to avoid her and Whiskers. That afternoon, Team 7 met in a small conference room to discuss strategy. Stevens, Morton, and Vex arrived early and sat clustered at one end of the table. Lisa arrived with Whiskers in his carrier and sat across from them. They waited for 20 minutes, but Cadet 13 never showed up. "Should we start without him?" asked Vex, a thin blue-skinned cadet with large eyes. "I don't think we have a choice," Stevens replied. "Maybe he'll join us later." But Lisa was beginning to understand. She had noticed how Cadet 13 always left when she appeared. Now he was avoiding a mandatory team meeting. "I think it might be because of me," she said quietly. The other cadets looked at her in surprise. "You?" asked Morton. "Why would the most dangerous cadet in the academy be afraid of you?" Lisa looked down at Whiskers, who was sleeping peacefully in his carrier. "I'm not sure. But every time I'm in a room, he leaves. Maybe he doesn't like humans. Or maybe he doesn't like cats," Vex said thoughtfully. She had heard rumors about Professor Vex's research into Cadet 13's behavior. The team spent an hour discussing possible strategies, but without their strongest member, they felt unprepared. Combat assessments were designed to be challenging for teams with natural warriors. A team of mostly peaceful species, plus one human with no combat experience, seemed doomed to fail. 3 days later, the teams assembled at the Corthan training facility. The facility was a massive complex built into a mountain, with dozens of different environments for testing combat scenarios. Team 7 gathered at the transport landing pad with their equipment. Stevens carried a standard-issue plasma rifle that looked too big for his small frame. Morton had his natural claws and scales, but he was from a peaceful branch of the Draco species. Vex carried an engineering toolkit and a small defensive shield generator. Lisa carried a tactical computer and analysis equipment, plus Whiskers in his travel carrier. She had also been issued a basic sidearm, though she had little training with weapons. Cadet 13 arrived last, carrying enough weapons and equipment for 3 normal cadets. But when he saw Lisa with Whiskers, he stopped walking and stood 20 feet away from the group. Cadet 13 called Instructor Davis, who was supervising. The loading. You need to join your team. Cadet 13 looked at the instructor, then at Lisa, then at the small orange shape visible through the carrier bars. His hands clenched and unclenched. Sweat appeared on his forehead, despite the cool morning air. I cannot, he said in his gravelly voice. Cannot what? Instructor Davis asked. Cadet 13 pointed at Whiskers' carrier. The creature. I cannot be near it. A murmur went through the assembled cadets. The most feared student at the academy was afraid of a house cat. Some cadets began to laugh, but the laughter died quickly when Cadet 13's yellow eyes swept over them. The assessment is mandatory, Instructor Davis said firmly. All team members must participate together. For a long moment, Cadet 13 stood frozen. His warrior training told him to face any challenge, but his deepest instincts screamed that the small orange creature was deadly dangerous. Finally, he took a deep breath and walked toward the group. But he stayed as far from Lisa as possible, and kept his eyes fixed on anything except Whiskers' carrier dot. The transport lifted off and flew toward the assessment area. Inside the cramped compartment, the tension was thick. Cadet 13 sat pressed against one wall, as far from Lisa as the small space allowed. Every few seconds, his eyes would dart toward the carrier, then quickly look away. Lisa noticed his obvious distress, but didn't understand it. She tried to be friendly. I'm Lisa Carter, she said. I'm looking forward to working with you. Cadet 13 nodded, but didn't speak. His attention was focused on the soft sounds coming from the carrier as Whiskers shifted position inside. This is Whiskers, Lisa continued, not realizing the effect her words were having. He's very well behaved. He won't cause any problems during the assessment. At the mention of the cat's name, Cadet 13's breathing became faster. His claws extended slightly from his fingertips before he forced them to retract. The transport landed in a dense forest area. Instructor Davis briefed them on their first challenge: navigate through 5 miles of wilderness while avoiding automated defense systems. The systems would use non-lethal weapons, but being hit would result in point deductions. You have 6 hours to reach the checkpoint, Davis explained. Your performance will be judged on speed, stealth, and teamwork. Begin when ready. Team 7 gathered their equipment and moved into the forest. Normally, Cadet 13 would have taken command immediately. His natural abilities made him perfect for wilderness navigation, and his tactical knowledge was excellent. But instead, he hung back from the group, constantly looking around as if expecting an attack. Every sound made him jump. When a branch snapped under someone's foot, he spun around with his claws extended. What's wrong with him? Morton whispered to Stevens. I don't know, Stevens replied. He looks terrified. Lisa was beginning to realize that Cadet 13's problem was specifically with Whiskers. She had to carry the cat's travel carrier, and wherever she went, Cadet 13 would position himself as far away as possible while still remaining with the team. This created a serious tactical problem. The team was spread out in a long line instead of moving in a tight, coordinated group. When the first automated defense drone appeared, they were completely unprepared. The drone was a small flying robot with non-lethal stun weapons. It should have been easy for a team with Cadet 13's combat abilities to handle. But Cadet 13 was 30 feet away from the rest of the team, watching Whiskers' carrier instead of watching for threats. The drone fired at Stevens, hitting him with a stun blast that knocked him down. Morton tried to return fire, but missed. Vex activated her shield generator, but it only protected her. Lisa, who had been studying tactical manuals for weeks, suddenly realized what needed to happen. "Cadet 13, she called out. "We need suppression. Fire on the drone while Morton flanks left." But Cadet 13 didn't respond. He was staring at Whisker's carrier, where the cat had woken up from the noise and was looking out through the bars. To Cadet 13, the cat's alert, predatory gaze was more threatening than any weapon. The drone fired again, hitting Morton. Now, half the team was down. "Cadet 13, Lisa shouted again. "Focus!" But it was no use. The most dangerous cadet in the academy was paralyzed by fear of a small house cat. Lisa realized that if they were going to survive this assessment, she would have to take charge. She set down Whisker's carrier behind a large tree, making sure he was safe, then grabbed Stephen's plasma rifle. She had never used one in combat, but she understood the principles. "Vex, extend your shield to cover Morton," she ordered. "Help him get back up. I'll distract the drone." The second day of the assessment was worse than the first. Team 7 had failed 3 of their 4 challenges, earning the lowest scores in the entire academy. Every time they encountered a threat, the same thing happened. Cadet 13 would become paralyzed by fear whenever Whiskers was visible, leaving the rest of the team to handle situations they were not equipped for. Lisa had tried everything she could think of. She kept Whisker's carrier covered with a blanket, but Cadet 13 could still hear the cat moving inside. She tried leaving the carrier hidden at the start of each challenge, but the assessment rules required all personal belongings to stay with the cadets at all times. By the evening of the second day, the rest of the team was exhausted and demoralized. They sat around their assigned camp area, eating field rations and trying not to think about how badly they were failing. "We're going to set a record," Morton said bitterly. "The worst performance in Academy history." "It's not fair," Stevens added. "We're being graded against teams that have natural warriors. We can't compete." Vex was running calculations on her tablet. "If we fail the final challenge tomorrow, 3 of us will probably be dropped from the program." Lisa looked over at Cadet 13, who sat alone at the edge of their camp. He had barely eaten anything in 2 days and looked exhausted. She realized that this was probably harder on him than anyone else. His entire identity was built around being strong and dangerous, but he had been reduced to a trembling, fearful creature by the presence of a small house cat. She made a decision. Standing up, she walked over to where Cadet 13 sat staring into the darkness. "Can I sit with you?" she asked. He looked up at her, surprised. No cadet had voluntarily approached him since he had arrived at the academy. "Why?" "Because we need to talk," Lisa said, sitting down on a fallen log across from him. "This isn't working. We both know that." Cadet 13 nodded slowly. "I am not functioning as I should." "You're scared," Lisa said simply. "And that's okay. Everyone is scared of something." "Zephyrians do not fear," Cadet 13 said automatically, but his voice lacked conviction. "Zephyrians are smart enough to recognize real danger," Lisa corrected. "On your world, creatures like Whiskers are dangerous. Your fear makes sense." Cadet 13 looked at her with surprise. Most beings would have mocked him for his weakness. Instead, this small human was validating his feelings. "But Whiskers isn't dangerous," Lisa continued. "Not to you, not to anyone. He's what we call a domestic animal." "Do you know what that means?" Cadet 13 shook his head. "It means his species, and my species made an agreement thousands of years ago. We would take care of them, feed them, protect them, and they would live with us as companions. Over many generations, we bred them to be gentle and friendly." "Bred them?" Cadet 13 asked. "We chose which cats could have babies based on their personality. The aggressive ones, the truly dangerous ones, were not allowed to reproduce." Only the gentle, friendly cats had kittens. After thousands of years, we created a new kind of cat, one that looks like a predator, but acts like a friend. This concept was completely foreign to Cadet 13. On his world, you either dominated other species, or you were dominated by them. The idea of a partnership, of deliberately making another species less dangerous, was beyond his understanding. Why? He asked. Lisa smiled. Because we were lonely. Humans are social creatures. We need companionship, friendship, emotional support. Cats provide that. They comfort us when we're sad, keep us company when we're alone, and make us laugh when they play. They serve no tactical purpose. Their tactical purpose is to make us happy, Lisa said. A happy human is a better human. We fight better, think better, work better when we have emotional support. Cadet 13 considered this. His species had no concept of emotional support. Zephyrians were solitary by nature, coming together only to mate or to establish dominance hierarchies. The creature ... whiskers ... He is not a threat? I promise you, he is not a threat, Lisa said. Would you like me to prove it? Before Cadet 13 could object, Lisa walked back to their camp and returned with Whisker's carrier. Cadet 13 immediately tensed, his claws extending slightly. It's okay, Lisa said softly. I'm going to show you something. She set the carrier down between them and opened the door. Whisker stepped out, stretched, and sat down to clean his paw. He seemed completely unaware of the massive predator sitting just a few feet away. Cadet 13's breathing became rapid and shallow. Every instinct told him to run or fight, but Lisa's calm presence kept him from fleeing. Watch, Lisa said. She reached out and gently petted Whiskers behind the ears. The cat immediately began purring, a soft rumbling sound that Cadet 13 had never heard before. What is that sound? He asked. He's purring. It means he's happy and content. Cats only purr when they feel safe and loved. As Lisa continued petting him, Whiskers rolled onto his back, exposing his belly completely. To Cadet 13, this was the most shocking thing he had ever seen. No predator would ever expose its most vulnerable area unless it felt completely safe. He trusts you, Cadet 13 observed. Completely, Lisa agreed. And I trust him. Watch this. She put her finger near Whisker's mouth. The cat gently licked her finger with his small pink tongue, then playfully grabbed her hand with his paws. His claws were extended, but he was careful not to scratch her. See? He has claws, he has teeth, he has all the tools of a predator, but he chooses not to use them as weapons. He's been taught that humans are friends, not prey. Cadet 13 watched, in fascination as Lisa and Whiskers played together. The cat would grab her hand, bite gently, kick with his back legs, then roll away and pounce back. It looked like combat, but it was clearly play. This is how he practices hunting, Lisa explained. But it's just for fun now. He doesn't need to hunt for food because I feed him. He doesn't need to fight for territory because I protect him. All his predatory instincts have been turned into games. Suddenly, alarms began blaring throughout the assessment area. Emergency lights flashed red, and an announcement echoed from speakers. All cadets take immediate shelter. Training systems malfunction. Repeat, training systems malfunction. In the distance, they could see one of the large combat drones that was used for advanced training. But instead of following its programmed route, it was moving erratically, its weapon systems active and targeting anything that moved. That's not supposed to happen, Lisa said, quickly scooping up Whiskers and putting him back in his carrier. The rogue drone was heading toward their camp area. Its weapons were not set to non-lethal mode like the smaller training drones. This was a real combat unit with live ammunition. Other teams in the area were scattering, running for the emergency shelters. But Team 7 was too far from the nearest shelter. They would never make it in time. "We need to find cover," Stevens shouted, running toward them, but there was no cover large enough to hide all 5 team members. The drone's sensors would detect them wherever they tried to hide. Lisa's mind raced through tactical options. She had studied combat scenarios extensively, but they all assumed you had proper weapons and trained soldiers. Her team had neither. "We need to disable it," she said. "How?" Morton asked. "Our weapons can't penetrate its armor." Lisa looked at the drone, analyzing its design. She noticed that its sensor array was less heavily armored than the rest of its body. If they could blind it, they might be able to get close enough to find a weak spot. "We need a distraction," she said. "Something to draw its fire while someone gets behind it." Everyone looked at Cadet 13. His natural speed and armor made him the only one capable of surviving close combat with the drone. But Cadet 13 was still staring at Whiskers' carrier. Even with a genuine threat approaching, his fear of the cat was overriding his combat instincts. The drone was getting closer. In less than a minute, it would be in weapons range. Lisa made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. She grabbed Whiskers' carrier and ran directly toward the approaching drone. "Lisa, no!" Stevens shouted. But she had a plan. The drone's targeting system was programmed to prioritize the largest threats first. A small human carrying a pet carrier would be the lowest priority target. She was right. The drone's weapons tracked toward Cadet 13, identifying him as the primary threat. This gave Lisa the chance she needed. "Now!" she shouted to Cadet 13. "While it's focused on me." But Cadet 13 remained frozen. The sight of Lisa running toward danger while carrying the creature that terrified him created a conflict his mind couldn't process. The drone fired. Lisa dove to the side, still clutching Whiskers' carrier. The blast missed her by inches. "Cadet 13!" she yelled. "I need you. The team needs you." Something in her voice, the desperation and trust, finally broke through his paralysis. For the first time in days, Cadet 13 stopped thinking about the cat and started thinking about his teammates. Lisa was in danger. Stevens was in danger. All of them were in danger because he was too afraid to act out with a roar that echoed across the training area. Cadet 13 charged the drone. His speed was incredible, covering the distance in seconds. The drone tried to track him, but he was too fast. He leaped onto the drone's back, his claws finding gaps in the armor plating. Sparks flew as he tore through critical systems. The drone spun and bucked, trying to throw him off, but his natural armor protected him from its defensive systems. Within seconds, the drone crashed to the ground, disabled. Cadet 1